US President Barack Obama has arrived in Israel with plenty of smiles, hugs and handshakes for everyone. His priorities on this trip to the Middle East, Iran and Syria. But as far as the stalled peace process with the Palestinians and Israeli goes, does Obama have anything to offer? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It's President Obama's first foreign trip since he began his second term in office, and his first to Israel as US President. But Obama's three-day tour of the Middle East is being seen as largely symbolic. He arrived in Tel Aviv on Wednesday after 4 years of strained relations between him and his Israeli counterpart. Expectations are exceedingly low. Syria and Iran will be top of the agenda, but despite no new plan to bring Israel and the Palestinians back to the negotiating table, Obama had supportive words for Israel.
Peace must come to the Holy Land. For even as we are clear-eyed about the difficulties, we will never lose sight of the vision of an Israel at peace with its neighbors. So as I begin this visit, let me say as clearly as I can, the United States of America stands with the State of Israel because it is in our fundamental national security interest to stand with Israel. It makes us both stronger, it makes us both more prosperous, and it makes the world a better place.
Behind the smiles and friendly handshakes, the White House made clear ahead of the visit that the trip was largely symbolic. So what do the Palestinians, Israelis and the US expect to gain from this presidential visit? Well, expectations for the peace process have never been lower. The White House announced ahead of the visit it will not propose a new peace initiative. The trip is also a chance for President Obama and Netanyahu to reset their tense relationship. And as the security situation continues to deteriorate in neighbouring Syria, Israel will raise concerns the violence could threaten its borders. But top of the agenda will most likely be Iran. Israel wants to lower the bar for an attack on Iran should it get any closer to building a nuclear bomb. Obama will be trying to temper those expectations and refuse to commit to any military action. Joining us now are our guests in Jerusalem, Gerald Steinberg. He's the president of NGO Monitor and is a professor of political science at Bar-Ilan University. In Boston, David Mednikoff, director of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and in Washington, D.C. Hussein Ibish, she's a senior fellow at the American Task Force on Palestine. That's a non-governmental organization advocating a two-state solution. Gerald, did Barack Obama's words go down with Israelis? Did he say what they want to do here?
Oh, I think very much so. He said almost exactly all the right words. And also his body language was one which was friendly. It showed greater understanding than he's shown in the last 4 years of how Israelis see their situation. It makes a big difference. So he talked about the long history of the Jewish people in this land, something that Israelis felt was missing, particularly from his Cairo speech of 4 years ago, but also from the way in which he dealt with Israelis for a long time. He talked about the Israeli accomplishments. He talked about the friendship, the long-standing friendship between the United States and Israel, talked about 65 years of Israeli independence as a beacon of freedom and democracy in the Middle East, and the basis for the close relationship, the alliance between Israel and the United States. Those were all important words, and it was a very good beginning in terms of really repairing or restarting the relationship that had been so damaged over the last 4 years between not just Israel and the United States, but particularly between the president and the Israeli public and its elected representatives.
But do you think underlying that, I mean, we know that there's not much on the table as far as the peace process is concerned. Do you think some Israelis were thinking, oh no, he's going to be bringing up the pesky Palestinian issue and we'd sort of forgotten about it for a bit?
Oh, Israelis don't forget about the Palestinian issue. They're very aware of it. It's a small country, and everywhere we look, we know that there is a lot of unfinished business and a lot of instability that has to be dealt with. But exactly. And I think Israelis are always expecting to have a new American initiative, and some Israelis, perhaps a majority, are concerned that we may go through another 4 years of failure. But in fact, I think there is an anticipation that things will be better, that if there is a new American initiative, or when there is a new American initiative, that it will be much more based on a solid foundation, on realities that Israelis can live with, and perhaps will actually lead to some progress. So the oh no part of it, Israelis have been through that for a long time. That was certainly when the president announced he was coming. That was probably something that was thought, and it was certainly written about. But there's also an opportunity here to go further with that. And of course, Israelis are also looking across their borders. We look at what happens in Syria every day. That's a real major imminent danger of chaos, of violence, of chemical weapons, of a jihadist government. All sorts of things could happen there, and and of course the humanitarian catastrophe. Looking at Egypt and the instability there are many issues on the table. There must be greater cooperation with the United States, and Israelis need that reassurance that in fact that is going to be what's happening in the next 4 years of the Obama administration.
David, as we're talking, we're looking at pictures of Barack Obama getting off the plane, Air Force One, meeting up with Netanyahu. They're wearing matching ties, very lovey-dovey, lots of hugs and backslapping. Do you think this was well orchestrated to paint a picture of everything's fine now, that Chile relations are over, on the outside anyway?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with Professor Friedman that the point of this visit is to really reset the decks. It's very important from Obama's standpoint to appear to reassure the Netanyahu government, the new government, as well as the Israeli people more generally. And so what we're seeing is, I think, very much the opposite to the approach from the Obama administration 4 years ago, where he sort of articulated a position that he thought had to happen on the negotiations. And I think that was perceived in Israel as laying down a gamut that really wasn't going to work. So I think what's really going to be interesting, as you say, is to see what happens after the visit is done, because the visit will be carefully orchestrated to do the maximal possible to put Israelis and the Netanyahu government, I think, in a place of feeling really strong about the level of this president's commitment to Israel. But then we'll see, what of the other issues come into play next.
Hussein, is this good for your cause? I mean, do you get more results if there's more of an amicable relationship between the US and Israelis?
Well, it's complicated. I think in the end, the answer is if what the United States can offer the Palestinians really is delivering Israel and helping to broker between the Palestinians and Israel. This is a relationship of tremendous asymmetry of power, and the parties have proven, I think, over the decades that left to their own devices, they really will not come to an agreement. So it's a little counterintuitive, but in a way, Palestinians need to have the American president not totally disliked by the Israeli public, and to have a strong relationship between Israeli Prime Minister and either President or Secretary of State. If you just look at the past 2.5 years of great tension, personal tension, between President Obama and the Prime Minister Netanyahu, it certainly caused some difficulties between the political relations. It didn't affect the broader special relationship between Israel and the United States, but it damaged relationships between the two governments. But that didn't benefit the Palestinians at all. I don't see in any sense that they gained. So in a way, because in the end, what the Palestinians need the Americans to do is to broker and to help to deliver the Israelis, then yes, they need the United States to have a working relationship with Israel. Ultimately, though, one that involves pressure as well as inducements and tough love as well as simple hugs and backslaps.
Okay, let's talk about that tough love a little bit later on, but you all seem to agree that what's happening, this closer relationship is much better for both sides. But they are there, top of the agenda, we know, David, is Iran and Syria. What do you think they're going to try and work at there? Some sort of roadmap to dealing with these issues?
Well, I think this is exactly the key, and it goes back to Hussein's point. What the Obama administration's learned, I think, from the past is that making loud public statements to try to pressure the Netanyahu government tends to backfire because Israelis are very easily, and with some reason, prone to believe that there are security threats at their doorstep. And at the moment, Syria certainly is such a threat. And the ongoing concern about Iran, we never quite know how close Iran is. But the bottom line is that this is perceived as an existential threat to many Israelis. So what is going to happen for sure is that the Obama team will give many reassurances to the new government.
Like what?
Well, I mean, the Obama administration, has benefited somewhat from the Arab uprisings in that it does enjoy reasonably good relationships with the governments that are in power throughout the region. I mean, not amazing relationships. Syria is a very difficult situation right now, but to be sure, there are a variety of actors throughout the region that are working with various factions to see what's going to happen. So the administration is attempting to do more with respect to Syria. So in that regard, at the very least, the administration can say, we're on it, this is very important, we're going to follow up on this. With respect to Iran, this is a really difficult balance because, of course, what Washington wants is to do all in its power to make it unlikely for the Israeli government to take any unilateral action. This has been a consistent policy.
Okay, let me bring Gerald in there.
Again,
do you think Obama can convince Israel that Israel shouldn't go it alone as far as Iran is concerned? That the U.S. has Israel's back on this?
This is an ongoing dialogue, and with some ups and downs and tensions. We've heard it for the last 3 or 4 years. Different views in the United States and in Israel about the time frame and what needs to be done and the potential use of military power. So I'm not sure there's going to be new ground to be broken. They're going to talk through it again and again and again. There are some new people in the government or people who've changed their positions. There's a new Israeli defense minister who I would probably define as likely to be more hawkish than Mr. Barak. Moshe Bogi Ya'alon is now taking over and has stronger hawkish views on the need to stop Iran before it crosses the red line. So these things have to be continually talked about. The very fact that President Obama is here in Israel and talking to the Israeli leaders and to the Israeli public and doing all these photo ops is a way of making the words become more significant. Yes, we have your back, and we're not just talking about it, we're going to be here to help you out. We're going to continue to provide the military equipment that's necessary. We saw at the airport there were displays of the anti-missile intercept systems the United States has helped Israel develop, and that Israel has developed the technology for the United States. That emphasized the close relationship, the cooperation, gave the Israelis a certain amount of pride. Here we've done things that the Americans have not been able to do. That's important when
I'm going to jump in here quickly. I mean,
somebody has to make a decision about Iran.
Be if Iran releases some sort of nuclear weapon or there's proof that Iran has a nuclear weapon, Israel will get involved. The question really is, I should imagine, what the response will be as far as Syria is concerned, if they do have some sort of dirty weapons, which was alluded to today.
I think in some ways Syria is even more complicated than Iran, because Iran, there are red lines and we can agree or disagree about where those are, but that's all been rehearsed and discussed. Syria is complete chaos. There's so many different factions. One of the issues that comes up, and I expect there'll be some discussion about this in private, is whether or not it would make sense for the West. The British and the French are talking about arming some of the factions, some of the rebels in Syria, but trying to keep those weapons out of the hands of the jihadis, who are the main danger, people who are al-Qaeda, who are actually implanting themselves now along the Golan Heights and the border with Israel. So, and how do we deal with possible transfer of weapons to Hezbollah? There are many, many scenarios. Israelis understand the Americans do not want to get physically involved in another war. At best, they might be able to lead from behind, like Libya, which didn't really turn out so well either right now. So Israel has to decide and talk over with the United States at the very top level what Israel might have to do for its own interests, where the United States could play a role, perhaps also in talking and leading NATO into playing perhaps some sort of a more robust and security-based, stabilizing-based role in Syria, and not another adventure of arming factions which nobody really knows what they're going to do and how they're going to go, and find that those weapons end up in the hands of jihadis.
Okay,
those
let's
are such
talk about
issues, and I
the
think
changing
the
situation in the region. Excuse me interrupting you there. Popular uprisings have changed the political geopolitical landscape in the Middle East in the last 2 years. We certainly alluded to that. The Egypt from which Obama addressed the Arab and Muslim world is no longer ruled by Hosni Mubarak. Gone are the authoritarian governments and leaders in Tunisia, Libya and Yemen. And there was no civil war in Syria. Clearly, so much of that has changed. I mean, David, the bloodbath that everybody expected because of this hasn't happened. In fact, they're friendly, those governments. They're making overtures towards Israel and the US.
Yeah, I think that it's exactly right to bring the broad regional context in here, because what I think is interesting, as I mentioned, is that, after this visit, what happens with the administration and how it approaches Israel will be very interesting to watch. And one of the things that's critical here is both the United States and Israel is well aware that the region is changing very rapidly, that there are these new governments that may right now play well with Washington and might even, in Egypt's case, play relatively well with Israel. But the long run is very mysterious. A lot of things that one could take for granted are not there anymore. Turkey, which was long an ally for Israel in the region, is no longer reliable in this regard. And what this means is that there's lots of people, both in Washington and in the broader United States and in Israel, who know that some sort of forward momentum on regional stabilization, which of course will involve the Palestinians, is going to have to get back on the table.
Gerald, quite interesting that on the same day that Barack Obama arrives, an Israeli foreign ministry official has gone off to Egypt, first time since the revolution. Is that coincidental, the timing, or what do you think's behind that?
It's hard to know. There have been some other talks that have been going on between Israel and Egypt over the last few months after the Morsi government came in. There are major concerns about jihadi elements in Sinai, possible attacks, both on Egyptian troops in Sinai and across the border into Israel. So there has to be coordination with respect to how to deal with the Gaza issue, the arms smuggling that goes on, weapons from Iran used to go through Syria, now Iran directly through Sudan and then through Sinai into Gaza. Egypt plays a central role in trying to cut off that type of very dangerous arms smuggling. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot of coordination to be done. And in fact, that coordination has continued and perhaps even increased under the Morsi government. That's realpolitik, that's realism. It's not the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood that's determined. It is the fact that both the Egyptian national interests and Israeli security interests coincide on these issues. Therefore, we need to maintain those kinds of communications and coordination channels. All that is very good in terms of stability. The United States is the main sponsor of that stability, and the Obama administration has really emphasized that. When President Morsi came to the United States, to Washington, that was one of the points that was made, and we've seen it. It is not a government there that has decided to basically take a strong ideological brotherhood line or Islamic line and caused its own interest to be injured. Egypt needs a huge amount of economic aid from the United States. So I put all those pieces together, coincidence on the timing or not, there certainly is a great deal of coordination between Washington, Cairo, and Jerusalem on issues of importance to all three.
And you talk
and that
about
is a good sign for the Middle East.
Security. I mean, the former CIA chief, as well as Barack Obama, always talk about how an insecure region, particularly the lack of peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians, make the US more vulnerable to any sort of attacks. And let's just go back a little bit to 2009 and how things have changed and Obama's response to Israel today. In 2009, he spoke of how a two-state solution was the only solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
For decades then, there has been a stalemate. Two peoples with legitimate aspirations, each with a painful history that makes compromise elusive. But if we see this conflict only from one side or the other, then we will be blind to the truth. The only resolution is for the aspirations of both sides to be met through two states, where Israelis and Palestinians each live in peace and security.
Hussein, remember that excitement? I mean, the Palestinians really thought that this was a US president who could make a difference, and now many people are wondering whether we're going to see ever a two-state solution.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I mean, I still think, though, that what he said in Cairo was correct. I mean, factually, it is the only conflict-ending solution. There are many scenarios, but there's no other solution. Any other outcome will simply provide for additional conflict. It has become harder in the 3 years since that speech to get there, and the next year is potentially a dangerous one with some very damaging Israeli settlement expansion plans, which, if they are carried out, which I do not think that they will be, partly because I think that President Obama will have something to say about that in private, that they would continue to become more difficult. However, it remains, I think, the only viable strategic option for the parties. Now, nobody expects, I think, that there's going to be a resumption of major negotiations right away. And in fact, one should be cautious about that because the danger of additional disappointment and additional failures is rather great. However, there's a great deal of groundwork that can be laid. Not just, we talked about repairing the political relationship between Obama and Netanyahu, but there's also a very strained relationship between Washington and the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah. And it's extremely important that President Obama is not just going to Israel, but he's going to Ramallah and he's going to Bethlehem, that he's going to have extensive meetings with President Abbas and Prime Minister Fayyad.
Well, he's got to repair relations there too, doesn't he?
Yeah, yes, it is required to repair relations. And that breach, in a sense, that began with the Security Council resolution on settlements, actually, it predates. The strain really predates the UN membership bids of last year and the year before that, has been very great, and it's been tangibly expressed in a huge reduction in U.S. and Western aid, which has rendered the PA incapable of meeting payroll in a timely fashion and has undermined its ability to govern. So obviously there has to be some major repair work done here, and the two sides need each other. And I think it's become very clear over the past few months that if the United States tries to express anger at the PLO diplomatic actions at the UN by undermining the ability of the PA to govern in Area A in the West Bank, the only beneficiary is Hamas. And I think that's become pretty clear. So I would expect
I think there's some important elements that are missing
it's going to be
here.
possible to do.
Go ahead, Gerald.
What's that?
Can we go back a little bit further than that? I think Hussein is right, but he doesn't go far enough, because when President Obama made his speech in Cairo, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke at my university, Bar Ilan University, and accepted the legitimacy and the desire and the goal of a two-state solution, no Likud prime minister had ever talked about a Palestinian state. He was violating all sorts of ideological taboos and paid a price. And then he had a 10-month settlement freeze. And what did the Palestinian leadership, what did Mr. Abbas and Fatah and the PLO, what did they give in return? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We had a 10-month settlement freeze. Mr. Netanyahu went as far as he could politically.
Now, I'm sure Professor Steinberg knows that during...
And
hold on.
Let me just finish this point. Let me just finish this point for a second.
You've raised it. Fine, go ahead.
Go ahead, gentlemen.
I'd make it very short, and that is that the Palestinians have to put something on the table. They have to put the refugee claims, the narrative, all of the apartheid mythology and all of the other campaigns that take place against Israel. They're not on the table in the sense that you do not hear Palestinian leaders say, we are changing our policy, we're open for negotiation. It's only about settlements. You yourself have only talked about settlements in this discussion, and not about other issues. And I listen to
everyone. David, why don't you jump in with some concluding words, because we're running out of time.
Let me respond to Professor Steinberg for a second there. Look, he has to know that President Abbas has made some very significant comments about the question of refugees, and he has to know that the Palestinians agree that the refugee issue is a final status issue to be negotiated, and he knows that during that so-called settlement freeze, there was not even a a slight slowdown in settlement expansion because of things that were grandfathered in, and that Israel refused to extend that settlement expansion.
Like I said,
So
I'm afraid I'm going to have to.
There's no point in blaming
I am going to have
each
to
other.
jump
This
in
is silly.
because we've run out of time. Sadly, it's just too short a show to cover all the issues that have to be dealt with before there's any movement. Gentlemen, thank you, all three of you, for joining me on Inside Story. Gerald Steinberg, David Mednikov, and Hussein Ibish. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to, you can send us your feedback. Just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye for now.